Dennis Martin. In June of 1969, a young boy named Dennis Martin vanished in the Great Smoky Mountains, and the search that followed became the largest in the history of the entire national park system. More than half a century later, he has never been found. Dennis Lloyd Martin was born on June 20th, 1962, in Knoxville, Tennessee. He was just 6 years old at the time of his disappearance, only 6 days short of his 7th birthday. He was the youngest in his family, a quiet, small boy who stood about 4 feet tall and weighed roughly 55 pounds, with dark brown wavy hair and dark brown eyes. Dennis was on an annual Father's Day camping trip, a cherished tradition, hiking with his father William, known as Bill, his 9-year-old brother Douglas, and his grandfather Clyde. It was Dennis's first overnight camping trip, and the youngest Martin boy had kept up with the more experienced hikers all the way through. The group had started from Cades Cove, hiking to Russell Field where they camped overnight before setting out the next morning on the roughly 90-minute walk east to Spence Field. On the 14th of June, the group reached Spence Field, an open grassy area high along the ridgeline near the Appalachian Trail. There they crossed paths with another family who also had children along, and the boys hatched a small, harmless plan. What could go wrong with a simple prank? The children decided to split into 2 groups, circle around through the trees, and jump out to surprise the adults. Douglas and the other 2 boys headed south and west. Dennis went the other way, northwest toward the Appalachian Trail, slipping off alone into the woods. His father watched him go, his bright red t-shirt visible against the greenery. Dennis was also wearing green shorts and Oxford-style shoes. It took only minutes. When the other children leapt out to startle their parents around 4:30 in the afternoon, Dennis was not among them. He had walked into the forest and simply never walked back out. His father began searching and calling for him within 3 to 5 minutes, covering the Appalachian Trail west as far as a point called Little Bald, roughly a mile away, before turning back, thinking Dennis might have returned to the group on his own. But there was no sign of the boy anywhere. As evening fell, the situation grew worse. A heavy thunderstorm rolled across the mountains, dropping 3 inches of rain in a matter of hours, washing away footprints and any trace of a scent before search dogs could ever follow it. Temperatures that night dropped to nearly 50 degrees Fahrenheit. How do you find one small child in a wilderness that vast? The Great Smoky Mountains National Park covers more than 500,000 acres of some of the most rugged terrain in the eastern United States, straddling the border between Tennessee and North Carolina. It was chartered by Congress in 1934 and dedicated by President Franklin Roosevelt in 1940. The landscape is marked by steep slopes, narrow ravines, and dense forest, home to black bears, copperhead snakes, feral hogs, and bobcats. It is a place where a person can step off a trail and vanish within a few yards. The grandfather, Clyde, hiked all the way out to Cades Cove to raise the alarm with rangers that evening, and by 5 in the morning the next day, the search had begun in earnest. It grew at a staggering pace. The initial crew of about 30 swelled to 240 within hours as volunteers poured in. What started as a few dozen men grew into hundreds, and then into a small army. At its peak, around 1,400 people were combing the mountains, including park rangers, rescue squads, firefighters, college students, Boy Scouts, the Army National Guard, and even 60 Green Berets. 2 Huey helicopters were dispatched from Warner Robins Air Force Base in Macon, Georgia, to join the search from above, and bloodhounds worked the slopes below. But critical mistakes were made early on. Because it had rained so heavily, scent tracking dogs were not deployed in the initial hours. A later internal review would note that this was an error, because even if the original scent trail had been washed away, Dennis would have left a fresh trail if he was still moving after the storm had passed. The sheer speed at which the search escalated also created problems. There was no organized command structure at first, and the review concluded that the park had failed to realize it needed quick organization of manpower, overhead, and public relations. Rescue squad members and volunteers were often not properly equipped. By June 22nd, searchers had covered more than 56 square miles of brutal terrain. The effort consumed over 13,000 hours of labor and tens of thousands of dollars, and yet it produced almost nothing. Searchers did find child-sized footprints leading to a stream where they disappeared. The tracks showed one foot apparently barefoot and the other in an Oxford-style shoe, the same type Dennis had been wearing. Retired park ranger Dwight McCarter, who participated in the search, later wrote that the prints likely belonged to Dennis because they were not part of a group and none of the Boy Scouts helping with the search had been barefoot. But park officials at the time attributed them to a young Boy Scout in the search party, and the lead was never fully pursued. No clothing, no shoes, no remains, no answers. The main effort was scaled back on June 26th, with a final search on June 29th. 3 park employees continued searching until September 13th, when the effort formally closed. Before that, the park superintendent had written a letter expressing his personal belief that if Dennis were ever found, it would be within a few miles of the shelter near where he disappeared. Dennis's father offered a $5,000 reward for information, an amount equivalent to more than $43,000 today. So what happened to Dennis Martin? The most grounded theory is the simplest and the saddest, that he became lost and disoriented in the rugged ground, was caught in the storm, and did not survive the exposure. A 6-year-old in a t-shirt and shorts, soaked by 3 inches of rain in temperatures dropping toward 50 degrees, would have been gravely vulnerable. Some have even argued that the sheer chaos of so many searchers may have trampled the very evidence that could have found him. But the case also collected its share of darker possibilities. A man named Harold Key, roughly 5 miles away in another part of the park and 7 to 9 miles away by trail, later reported hearing what he described as a terrible, sickening scream. About 3 minutes later, he said he saw a rough, unkempt stranger moving quickly through the trees in the direction of the scream. Key also claimed the man was carrying something that appeared to be cloth or clothing, and that it was red, the color of the shirt Dennis had been wearing. He placed the time of his sighting at roughly an hour after Dennis's disappearance, around 7 in the evening. He did not come forward for days, and park rangers and the FBI ultimately concluded there was insufficient evidence to link the sighting to the boy's disappearance, particularly given the extraordinary difficulty of anyone traversing that distance in such a short time. But the account fueled years of speculation about a possible abduction, and it was later featured in a Hulu series called Out There: Crimes of the Paranormal in 2024. Could there have been remains out there all along? Years later, a ginseng hunter claimed he had stumbled upon the scattered bones of a small child in a hollow a few miles from where Dennis disappeared. He admitted he had said nothing at the time, afraid of being prosecuted for digging the protected plant illegally. By the time he finally spoke up, any chance of confirming his story was long gone, and a follow-up search turned up nothing at all. In 2022, the FBI publicly released Dennis Martin's case file, 133 pages of documentation, after investigator and author Michael Bouchard made relentless Freedom of Information Act requests. The Bureau had denied his requests 3 times before finally relenting. The release offered new details, but no resolution. To this day, Dennis Martin remains on the National Park Service's official list of cold cases. The lengthy federal case file has confirmed what many feared. Despite the largest search the park has ever mounted, the boy simply vanished. Bill Martin stayed on the mountain for days after his son disappeared, and the family never stopped hoping. Decades on, no trace of the boy has ever surfaced. Dennis Martin was never found, and his case became the largest search the park has ever mounted. The next disappearance came years afterward and carried its own unsettling questions, this time involving a high school student who walked just ahead of her classmates on a foggy trail and was suddenly gone. Trenny Gibson. In the autumn of 1976, a high school student named Trenny Gibson walked ahead of her classmates on a foggy mountain trail and was never seen again. Half a century later, no trace of her has ever been found. Teresa Trenny Lynn Gibson was a 16-year-old sophomore at Bearden High School in Knoxville. She lived on Whithour Drive with her mother Hope, her father Robert, her older brother Robert Jr., who was serving in the military, her 14-year-old sister Tina, and her 5-year-old brother Miracle. She worked at a cafeteria in a local mall, carefully saving her earnings, and she dreamed of studying landscape architecture at the University of Tennessee. Park records described her as having little experience in the outdoors, but she had a genuine interest in plants and trees, which is why she was enrolled in an ornamental horticulture class taught by a teacher named Wayne Dunlap. On the morning of October 8th, Trenny's mother drove her to school for the field trip. On the way, Trenny asked a fellow student if the trip was still on, assuming the foul weather would cancel it. It was not canceled. She took her bagged lunch, but left her purse, her books, and her coat in the car. She did not take a jacket of her own. Around 9 in the morning, she boarded a bus with 38 other students. Dunlap, the only adult chaperone for the entire group, told the students their destination only once they were seated. They were headed to the Great Smoky Mountains and the peak then known as Clingman's Dome, the highest point in the park. The bus driver stayed with the vehicle and did not accompany the students on the hike. What turns an ordinary school trip into a permanent mystery? Trenny sat on the bus with Robert Simpson, a senior and a friend of her older brother. When the bus arrived at the parking area, the students set out along the Forney Ridge Trail toward Andrews Bald, a high-elevation meadow roughly 1.8 miles from the parking lot. The day was dark, wet, and shrouded in heavy fog, with rain and hail threatening throughout. Before they departed, Dunlap instructed the students to stay on the trail and not go beyond the Bald. Because she had left her coat behind, Simpson lent Trenny his brown and orange plaid wool jacket to wear against the cold. She was also wearing a blue and white striped sweater, blue jeans, blue Adidas tennis shoes, and a star sapphire pendant. The two ate lunch together at Andrews Bald. Then, around 1:30 in the afternoon, Trenny decided to head back toward the bus. Simpson reportedly spotted a bear and wandered off to follow it, and the two became separated. On the way back down, around 2:50 in the afternoon, classmates saw Trenny walking just ahead of them on the trail, only about half a mile from the parking area and the waiting buses. One member of the group later told investigators she stopped to rest, but that Trenny kept going, saying she seemed to be in a hurry to get back. Another classmate thought she may have tried to go cross-country to reach the parking area more quickly. She bent down for a moment, she turned, and when the others looked again, she was gone. By 3:30, when the group had reassembled at the buses, Trenny had not arrived. A ranger searched the Bald and then filed a missing person report as the daylight failed. Her mother, Hope, was not notified for hours, learning her daughter had vanished only that evening, long after it happened. One of her classmates later recalled that on the following Monday, a teacher actually called Trenny's name during roll call, completely unaware that the girl had disappeared. How does a teenager disappear within sight of a parking lot? The search that followed was brutal and immediate, fighting wind, rain, fog, and darkness across the high ridges. Over the following days, the effort grew to include hundreds of searchers and tracking dogs. The dogs picked up Trenny's scent on the Andrews Bald Trail and followed it toward the Forney Creek Trail, but found no visible signs of her. One dog picked up her scent near the Clingmans Dome observation tower and followed it for approximately 1.5 miles along the Appalachian Trail before losing it at the Clingmans Dome Road. The trail of scent leading toward the road was the detail that changed the direction of the entire investigation. One searcher reported finding tennis shoe tracks of about her size along the Appalachian Trail, but they too vanished about 0.5 mile past a trail junction. The intensive search ran from October 8th through the 18th. A second organized effort was mounted the following spring, from April 18th through May 5th, 1977, with up to 50 searchers at peak times. Trenny's father refused to give up, organizing his own large search, and volunteers returned to look again years later. Through all of it, nothing surfaced. No clothing, no remains. No sign of the girl who had been walking just steps ahead of her friends. So where did the investigation turn? Because her scent led toward the road, the leading theory became abduction. The chief ranger came to believe she was no longer in the park at all. Investigators suspected she may have been taken near where the trail met the road, then driven out of the park entirely. The FBI was called in and interviewed students at Bearden High School, hoping to uncover something useful. Many students reportedly suspected Trenny might have run off with someone, though they could not say who. Reports trickled in from elsewhere. A young woman matching her description was said to have gone to Bryson City to get married. In another tip, someone told Knoxville police that a girl resembling Trenny had boarded a plane in Newark, New Jersey, with a much older man, and the two flew to Nassau. A hospital in Haywood County, North Carolina, reported they thought they may have treated her on the day she vanished, but the patient turned out to be a local girl. Every lead dissolved into nothing. Could someone she knew have been involved? Over the years, a few names drew scrutiny. Robert Simpson, the senior who had hiked with her, was looked at as a person of interest, in part because he was found to have her comb. He said she had given it to him, and he was never charged with anything. Another student named Kelvin Bowman, who had a history of conflict with the family, also drew suspicion. Trenny's mother, Hope, claimed he was a stalker who had once tried to break into their home. Other accounts suggested the two may have been secretly dating, a relationship that would have been controversial and a source of bullying at the school. The principal attempted to verify whether Bowman had been in school on the day of the field trip, and accounts placed him elsewhere that day. The records were sealed, no one was ever arrested, and no theory was ever proven. The governor's office eventually offered a reward for information leading to the person responsible for her disappearance. The possibility that she simply ran away was dismissed early on. She had left both her purse and her coat behind in the car, the belongings of someone who fully intended to come back for them. The disappearance took a devastating toll on the Gibson family. Her parents, unable to bear the weight of the unanswered questions, eventually divorced. In recent years, Trenny's Bearden High School classmates planted a memorial tree for her on the school grounds, with a plaque bearing her name. Today, Trenny Gibson remains on the National Park Service's list of cold cases, with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation now named as the agency on the file. Age progression images have been produced over the years, imagining the woman she might have become. An author has published a book on her case, alleging that information was deliberately withheld, though that remains an unproven claim. Her classmates, now approaching their 60s, continue to push for answers and to keep her name alive. Trenny Gibson walked ahead of her classmates and stepped out of the world, and persons of interest were weighed but never charged. The next case is stranger still. A woman who knew her trail by heart walked ahead of her two friends over a small rise and disappeared in the seconds before they crested it behind her. Polly Melton. Thelma Pauline, Polly McAllister. Melton knew the Deep Creek Trail as well as anyone. Born on February 26, 1923 in Alabama, she was one of 6 children. She had previously worked as a schoolteacher, and after 2 earlier marriages that ended in divorce, she married Robert Bob Melton in 1975. Bob was 20 years her senior and in declining health. For more than 20 years, the couple had spent the autumn months at the Deep Creek campground on the edge of the park near Bryson City, North Carolina, parking their Airstream trailer in the same familiar spot. While staying in North Carolina, Polly volunteered nearly every day at the Bryson City Presbyterian Church Nutrition Center, handing out meals to seniors. She reportedly never missed a shift. On an ordinary September afternoon in 1981, she went for a short walk on a trail she had hiked countless times, and she stepped off the face of the earth. How does a woman vanish from a path she knows by heart? That Friday, September 25th, Polly did something unusual. For the first time anyone could remember, she did not sign up to volunteer at the nutrition center. She offered no explanation, and the day before, she had made multiple phone calls from the center's telephone, something she had never done in all her years of volunteering. No one knows who she called. Around 3 in the afternoon, Polly set out with 2 friends, Trula Gudger and Red Cannon, whose given name was Pauline, heading down the easy, well-worn Deep Creek Trail. Her husband Bob, who was 77 and too frail for the walk, stayed behind at the trailer. Before leaving, Polly had prepared a pot of spaghetti sauce for that evening's dinner. She carried her cigarettes with her, Virginia Slims, which she smoked at a rate of roughly 2 packs a day. But she had no cash, no identification, no medication, and no car keys. She had not even been permitted to drive that month, for reasons that were never publicly disclosed. About an hour into the walk, the 3 women turned back toward the campground. Polly had been moving slower than usual that day, and her friends had been gently teasing her about it. One of them called out that she wouldn't want to be in a foot race with Polly. Polly turned and laughed. Then, without warning, she did something strange. She sped up. She pulled ahead of her companions, crested a small hill, and walked out of their sight. It was the last time anyone who knew her would ever see her. Her friends were not alarmed at first. They simply assumed she had gone on ahead to the campground. But when they arrived at the Airstream around 4:30, Bob told them he had not seen her at all. By early evening, she was reported missing to a park ranger, and a search began that would only deepen the mystery. What did the searchers find? Almost nothing, and what they did find made no sense. The trail was closed, and around 150 people with 9 dog teams covered roughly 100 miles of trails over 5 days. The tracking dogs picked up Polly's scent at the very spot where she was last seen, but then they circled and refused to go on, howling as though she had simply ceased to exist. There was no path leading away, no direction to follow. The scent ended where she had been standing, and so that was all. Bob Melton was so distraught on the night of his wife's disappearance that he had to be hospitalized. By some accounts, he suffered a stroke. He would eventually sell the Airstream, sever his ties to North Carolina, and spend the rest of his life in a nursing home in Gainesville, Florida, suffering from emphysema and heart problems. The search was officially concluded on October 2nd, 1981. And then park officials offered a surprising theory. They announced that evidence suggested Polly may have left the park voluntarily, slipping into a waiting vehicle on the nearby road to begin a new life somewhere else. And there were odd details that seemed to fit. She had skipped her volunteer shift that day, something she almost never did. The day before, she had made those uncharacteristic phone calls from the center to unknown persons. Her minister later confided that he suspected Polly may have been having an affair. Her friends recalled that during the hike, they had been teasing Polly about a man at the nutrition center who seemed interested in her. And while she had not denied it, she had been reluctant to say more. After she vanished, her husband's Valium prescription was found to be missing. Polly had used Valium frequently in 1979, but had supposedly stopped by 1981. Whether she took the pills with her, or whether they had simply been misplaced, has never been established. Her mother, Luella, to whom Polly was extremely close, had died in 1977, and Polly had gone through a dark period of depression afterward, though friends said she seemed to be doing better by the time she disappeared. Then, months later, came the strangest detail of all. On April 14th, 1982, a check made out in Polly's name for interest on a bank certificate was cashed at the Birmingham Trust National Bank in Birmingham, Alabama, where some of Polly's family lived. The bank teller had no recollection of the person who cashed it and could provide no description. The signature appeared authentic, but investigators could never conclusively prove it was hers. Could a woman in her late 50s really walk away from her whole life without a word? It is possible, but it is far from certain. The other obvious theories run into walls of their own. Foul play seemed unlikely on a busy, populated trail with no evidence and no struggle. A medical collapse off the path might explain a sudden disappearance, except that the dogs found no trail leading off it. And Polly was known to be deeply afraid of snakes and unlikely to wander into the brush on her own. Every explanation leaves something unaccounted for. The waiting dinner argues she meant to return. The missing pills, the strange phone calls, and the cashed check hint at something planned. But neither Polly's friends nor any of her family members ever heard from her again. More than 4 decades later, Polly Melton is still listed among the park's official cold cases, her disappearance never explained. Given her age now, she is almost certainly no longer living. But how and where her short walk truly ended has never once been answered. Derek Luking. Derek Luking did not vanish by accident. Everything about his final days suggests a man who planned, in careful detail, to walk into the Great Smoky Mountains and never walk back out. What no one has ever been able to say for certain is why, or what became of him once he did. Derek Joseph Luking was born in Northern Virginia and was a quiet, dependable man in his mid-20s living in Louisville, Tennessee. He had graduated from Johnson University and previously worked overseas doing mission work. At the time of his disappearance, he held a steady job as an orderly at Peninsula Behavioral Health Center. His roommate, Ryan Molden, described him as someone with a servant's heart who had gone overseas to help the poor. He went by his initials, DJ, or by the nickname Drock. He had brown hair, hazel eyes, and a tattoo of Japanese characters meaning live or life on his left upper chest. But in the months before he disappeared, something had shifted. His father, Tim Luking, noticed he had started drinking and smoking cigarettes, habits that were deeply out of character. He seemed unhappy with his job and with the direction his life was taking. His vanishing fell close to the 1-year anniversary of the death of a grandfather he had loved deeply. What does a man do when he decides to disappear? In Derek's case, he prepared. Starting around March 14th, 2012, he purchased more than $1,000 in camping and survival supplies from Bass Pro Shop, a store called Knifeworks, and Coleman's. The gear included a Gerber pack axe, part of a military survival manual, a knife sharpener, a Coleman combination compass and thermometer, 100 feet of black paracord, a headlamp, a pocket knife, granola bars, an iPod pouch, and a Bear Grylls survival tool pack that contained a small flashlight, a fire starter, and a multi-tool. He also bought a tent and a sleeping bag. He moved between lodgings over the next 2 days, staying at a Motel 6 on the 14th, the Smokemont campground inside the park on the 15th, and the Microtel Hotel in Cherokee on the 16th. Surveillance footage captured him leaving the Cherokee Motel alone at 4 in the morning on March 17th, the last clear image of him anywhere. When he failed to show up for work, his roommate heard his alarm going off all morning and initially assumed he had simply forgotten to turn it off. When Derek did not appear at the behavioral health center, Molden and Derek's family grew alarmed. His family drove down from out of state. In his motel room, they found a Bible left open on the bed and a liquor bottle on the floor. On his computer, someone had searched for information about the Smokies. Then came the discovery that turned worry into dread. On their drive back to Tennessee, the family happened by sheer chance upon Derek's white Ford Escape, parked in a lot at Newfound Gap, high on the road that crosses the mountains at the Tennessee-North Carolina state line. They found the car at 8:30 that morning and immediately phoned it in. What was inside made the situation stranger still. The vehicle was packed with the brand new survival gear he had just bought: the axe, the compass, the tent, the sleeping bag, the paracord, the headlamp, and more. His wallet and his keys were there too, and there was a note. It read simply, "Don't try to follow me." Why would a man buy a mountain of survival equipment and then leave every piece of it behind? That contradiction sits at the heart of the case. He had spent days assembling exactly what a person would need to survive in the wilderness. And then he had walked away from all of it, carrying almost nothing. Park officials expressed uncertainty about whether Derek had even written the note himself. A park spokesman said the most disturbing aspect of the disappearance was that it had been a sunny, busy day, with heavy foot traffic at Newfound Gap, and not a single person they spoke to had seen him. If he had been on the trails, someone would have noticed. It appeared he had left the trail almost immediately. The search was large and determined. Around 60 searchers and several dog teams covered more than 70 miles of trail over about a week, organized into 14 separate teams. Searchers explored every spot along the trail where it would be relatively easy to step off into the woods, following these paths until they reached a barrier, such as a dense rhododendron thicket, where no one could have passed without leaving evidence. Teams even rappelled down cliff faces to check the ravines below. The combined cost of the search for Derek and a second man who vanished nearby at the same time exceeded $70,000. And yet, on a sunny day in a busy national park, not a single hiker recalled having seen him. He had simply melted into the landscape. So what happened to Derek Lou King? His family, particularly his father Tim, wrestled publicly with every possible explanation. Tim Lou King set up at the Newfound Gap parking area with a blue minivan decorated with "Find Derek" signs and his son's photographs, pressing flyers into the hands of every hiker who would take one. He was there through the night sometimes, scanning the dark mountains for the glimmer of a campfire. There are a few possibilities, and none of them brings closure. One theory holds that Derek was drawn to survivalist television and may have deliberately stripped himself of his gear to test whether he could endure the wild on his own, a challenge that went fatally wrong. Another, given the note, the Bible, the liquor, and his low spirits is that Derek may have gone into the mountains intending to end his life. His father acknowledged that rangers raised that very question, telling them that up until recently he would have said absolutely not. But in those circumstances, there was that possibility. A third explanation is the simplest of all, that he wandered off the trail into the steep, dense wilderness and became hopelessly lost, which would explain why no one saw him. More than a decade later, none of these can be ruled out, and none can be confirmed. Derek Lou King is still listed on the National Park Service's official roster of cold cases. His mother runs a Facebook page called Find Derek Lou King, keeping his story and his face alive, hoping someone out there still knows something. No remains have ever been recovered, and the case remains open. Tyler Gaddis. Most of the cases on this list are mysteries with no real ending. This one is very different. It is a murder, and it was solved. Yet the story behind it is no less disturbing for having an answer. In the early morning hours of Sunday, March 29, 2015, a young man named Tyler Britton Gaddis was killed inside a small historic church within the Great Smoky Mountains. The Smokemont Baptist Church, also known as the Lufty Baptist Church or the Oconaluftee Baptist Church, is a quiet wooden building near the Smokemont campground on the North Carolina side of the park. The church had originally closed its doors in 1939, but remained standing as a popular destination for tourists, photographers, and as an occasional venue for weddings and family reunions. On that night, it became the scene of a brutal and calculated killing. How does a man end up dead inside a church at 3 a.m? Tyler Gaddis was 25 years old, from Whittier, North Carolina. He had been living in the Cherokee and Whittier area of western North Carolina. He was lured to the remote church that night, and the reason came down to a tangled web of lies and resentment. The man who would kill him, Forrest Dakota Hill, 22 at the time and originally from Easley, South Carolina, was furious because Gaddis had exposed his deceptions. According to court documents, Dakota Hill had been living under a false name. He had created a profile on a dating website using the name Andrew and had begun seeing a woman he met there, telling her one story while living an entirely different one. He told the woman that his actual partner, Tabitha Renee Brown Ledford, was his sister. In reality, Brown Ledford was pregnant with his child. Dakota Hill was also reportedly planning to rob the woman of money she had recently been paid. Gaddis learned the truth and did something about it. Just hours before he was killed, he told the woman that Dakota Hill was not who he claimed to be, that his real name was not Andrew, that Brown Ledford was not his sister, but was carrying his child, and that he intended to rob her. For that simple act of honesty, Dakota Hill wanted him gone for good. What happened inside that church? Dakota Hill lured Gaddis to the church by telling him he wanted to go on an adventure. He drove to the Lufty Baptist Church with Gaddis and a second man named Jonathan Hill, who was no relation to Dakota Hill despite sharing the same surname. According to the criminal complaint, Dakota Hill told a witness afterward that he and Jonathan Hill had taken Gaddis to the Smokemont Church with the intention of killing him. The plan was cold and entirely deliberate. But when the moment came, Jonathan Hill lost his nerve and could not go through with his part. Dakota Hill did not hesitate. He attacked Gaddis with a knife under the bell tower. According to court records, once he had begun, he could not stop himself. Gaddis was stabbed at least 16 times in the chest, back, neck, and elsewhere, with an additional 7 to 8 defensive wounds found on his right wrist and hand, sustained as he tried to fight off the attack. Gaddis pleaded desperately for his life as it was happening. Jonathan Hill cried at the scene because Gaddis was begging him to help him while he was being stabbed. The two men then reportedly picked up Gaddis's body and slammed it down to make certain he was dead. His cause of death was listed as internal hemorrhage due to multiple stab wounds. The killers tried to cover their tracks. After leaving the church, Jonathan Hill tossed the handle of the knife out of the car window. The two then drove to Harrah's Cherokee Casino, picked up a companion, and went to a local hotel. Brown Ledford later admitted she knew the two men would assault Gaddis and help them bleach away the blood from the vehicle used that night. A 911 call came into the local Cherokee Indian Police Department around 3 in the morning, but the caller gave a false name, identifying himself as Raven York. It was an early and clumsy attempt at misdirection. Paramedics responded and found Gaddis lying face up, covered in blood. Because the church sat squarely inside the boundaries of a national park, the case immediately became a federal matter, drawing in the National Park Service's Investigative Services Branch and the FBI's Charlotte Division to untangle exactly what had happened. Could a crime this calculated really be solved so cleanly? It could, and it was. Unlike the many vanishings that haunt this park, the Gaddis case left behind a clear trail. Through detailed confessions and physical evidence, investigators pieced together the full sequence of that night. The following day, Jonathan Hill walked into the Cherokee Police Department and told investigators what he had witnessed. Forrest Dakota Hill pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. On August 16, 2016, he was sentenced by U.S. District Judge Martin Riedinger to 200 months in federal prison, nearly 17 years. Without the possibility of parole, followed by 5 years of supervised release. Jonathan Hill pleaded guilty to being an accessory after the fact to second-degree murder. He was sentenced on June 15, 2018, to 4 years in federal prison with 2 years of supervised probation to follow. The case was prosecuted by Jill Westmoreland Rose, United States Attorney for the Western District of North Carolina. The historic church where it all happened still stands inside the park near the campground to this very day. William Bradford Bishop. William Bradford Bishop, Jr. had every appearance of success. Born on August 1, 1936, in Pasadena, California. He attended South Pasadena High School, earned a bachelor's degree in history from Yale University, and later obtained a master's degree in international studies from Middlebury College. He was fluent in 5 languages and had served in military intelligence before joining the State Department's Foreign Service, accepting postings across Europe and Africa over the course of roughly a decade. He lived in a comfortable Maryland suburb with his wife Annette, who was 37, his mother Lobelia, who was 68, and his 3 sons, William Bradford III, age 14, Brenton, age 10, and Jeffrey, age 5. And then, in the spring of 1976, he is believed to have destroyed all of it in a single night, before vanishing into the Great Smoky Mountains. He has never been seen again. What turns a respected diplomat into one of America's most wanted fugitives? It is important to be clear about something. Bishop has never stood trial, and everything that follows is what police and the federal authorities allege, not what a court has proven. He was indicted by a Montgomery County grand jury on March 18, 1976, on 5 counts of murder. He remains to this day an accused man and nothing more in the eyes of the law. According to investigators, the unraveling began on the 1st of March, 1976, when Bishop learned he had been passed over for the promotion he had been seeking. A man already under psychiatric care for depression and chronic insomnia, and one who investigators say was struggling financially despite projecting an image of carefree wealth. He is said to have told his secretary he was feeling unwell and left his office in Foggy Bottom. a State Department colleague, Roy A. Harrell Jr., saw him outside the building and noted that he appeared agitated. It was the last confirmed sighting of Bishop by anyone who knew him. Police believe he then drove to his bank and withdrew several $100s. From there, he went to the Sears at Montgomery Mall, where he purchased a ball-peen hammer and a gas can. He filled the gas can and the tank of his 1974 Chevrolet station wagon at an adjacent gas station, then drove to a hardware store in Bethesda and bought a shovel and a pitchfork. He arrived home between 7:30 and 8 that evening. Police believe that night he killed his wife first, then his mother as she returned from walking the family dog, and then his 3 sons as they slept in an upstairs bedroom using the hammer. How does someone hide a crime of that magnitude? He did not try to hide it so much as flee from it. Authorities believe Bishop loaded his family into the back of the station wagon, along with the family dog, a golden retriever named Leo, which was still alive, and drove roughly 300 miles south to a remote, swampy area in eastern North Carolina, near the town of Columbia. There, in a shallow grave, he is said to have dug himself. The bodies were discovered the next day after forest rangers spotted smoke rising from the area and went to investigate. That same day, March 2nd, a man matching Bishop's description was reportedly seen at a sporting goods store in Jacksonville, North Carolina, purchasing a pair of sneakers. The family dog was apparently still with him. After that, the trail of evidence pointed in one direction, toward the mountains. Where does a man like this choose to disappear? He chose the Smokies. About 2.5 weeks after the killings, Bishop's abandoned station wagon was found at the Jakes Creek trailhead near Elkmont, inside the park. A ranger ran the license plate and discovered the vehicle was wanted in connection with the murders. Inside was a chilling inventory: bloodied items, a shotgun, an axe, dog biscuits, his shaving kit, his medication, and 7 cigarette butts in the ashtray. Those cigarette butts would prove significant decades later, as investigators extracted Bishop's DNA from them. A massive manhunt swept through the park. Investigators went so far as to identify more than 300 hikers and campers who had been in the area at the time, questioning each one. Retired park ranger Dwight McCarter took part in the search and retraced the route years later, coming to believe that a remorseful Bishop had walked into the wilderness and died there, his remains lost to the rugged terrain. But not a single person had seen Bishop or the dog. The trail, once again in this park, simply went cold. But did he really die in the mountains? Maybe not. Bishop held a diplomatic passport, spoke 5 languages fluently, had worked for both the CIA and the State Department, and knew Europe and Africa intimately. Over the years, numerous claimed sightings placed him overseas in more than a dozen countries, including Italy, Sweden, Belgium, the United Kingdom, Finland, the Netherlands, Germany, Greece, Spain, and Switzerland. Among the most credible, according to the United States Marshal Service, was a sighting in Stockholm in July 1978 by a Swedish woman who said she had worked with Bishop on a business trip in Ethiopia. She stated she was absolutely certain it was him. Then, in January 1979, Bishop's former colleague Roy Harrell reported encountering a bearded man in a restroom in Sorrento, Italy, and greeting him directly. The man reportedly responded in a distinctly American accent, denying that he was Bishop before quickly leaving. The case has produced strange twists across the decades. In 2014, Bishop was added to the FBI's 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list, the Bureau's 502nd entry, with a reward of up to $100,000 for information leading to his capture. He was removed from the list in June 2018, but an Interpol red notice remains in effect. In 2011, the FBI used fingerprints to determine that reports of Bishop's death in Hong Kong or France were false. In 2014, investigators exhumed the body of an unidentified man who had been struck and killed by a car on an Alabama highway in 1981, believing the remains might be Bishop's. DNA proved it was not him. Then, in 2021, DNA delivered a genuine surprise. A woman named Kathy Gilchrist in North Carolina had taken a 23andMe DNA test in 2017, checking a box indicating she was an adopted child looking for relatives. Her first match was a third cousin named Susan Gilmore, a genealogist from Maine who spent more than a year painstakingly building a family tree. Eventually, one name kept surfacing: William Bradford Bishop, Jr. The FBI, having heard about Gilchrist's story, sent 2 special agents to collect her DNA. They compared it against the genetic material extracted from the cigarette butts in Bishop's abandoned station wagon. It was a match. Gilchrist was confirmed as Bishop's previously unknown biological daughter, conceived before his marriage to Annette. The authorities publicized the connection, hoping it might shake loose a new lead. It has not. The man who would now be approaching 90 has never been found, and his case remains open. Michael Kokini. Some disappearances in the Smokies, and not with answers, but with a discovery. The case of Michael Kokini is one of those, and it remains one of the most sparsely documented stories the park has ever recorded. Michael Giovanni Kokini was a 23-year-old man, originally from the Nashville area, who at the time was staying temporarily in Gatlinburg, just outside the park. By the Park Service's own description, he was not a hiker. He carried no gear for hiking and nothing for camping overnight, which made his choice of destination all the more puzzling. Why would a man who never hiked drive into the heart of the mountains? On a Sunday afternoon, March 18, 2012, Kokini was last seen by friends at a Walmart in Sevierville around 2 in the afternoon. Sometime after that, he drove to a quiet pull-off along Newfound Gap Road, the main road that crosses the park, about 1 mile south of the Sugarlands Visitor Center. It was not a trailhead in any real sense. The short walkway there does not connect to the park's wider trail system at all. It simply leads down through the woods a short distance and dead ends at the west prong of the Little Pigeon River. Backpackers would have no reason to leave a vehicle there overnight. His car sat in that pull-off for 2 full days before anyone grew concerned. What happened next? By Tuesday, March 20th, rangers had noticed the vehicle had not moved since the weekend, and they began to search. A tracking dog was brought in, and the following day the effort expanded with additional teams and officers combing the river and the strip of forest around it. But the initial search came up empty. The terrain gave up nothing, and after about a week, the active search was scaled back. His case unfolded at almost exactly the same time as the disappearance of Derek Lou King near Newfound Gap. The 2 events happened within days of each other, both involving men in their early 20s who were not experienced hikers and who vanished off trail in the same stretch of the park. Online speculation quickly tried to link them, but officials were clear that the 2 men did not know each other, and that the timing was a haunting coincidence and nothing more. The combined cost of the 2 searches exceeded $70,000 in taxpayer funds. Then, months later, he was found. On August 21st, 2012, park employees conducting a field study came across personal items belonging to Kokini not far from where his car had been found. Over the following days, searchers returned to comb the area carefully. Human remains were recovered only about 3/10 of a mile from where he had parked. He had been there, close by, the entire time. On September 6th, the remains were positively identified as Kokini through dental records. With the help of the Sevier County Medical Examiner's Office, the Knoxville Regional Forensic Center, and the Knox County Sheriff's Forensic Unit. After months of uncertainty, his family at last had a definitive answer about what had become of him. But what had actually happened? According to the Park Service, investigators could not determine an exact cause of death after so much time had passed. What they could say was that the evidence found at the scene indicated Kokini had gone into the woods intending to take his own life, and that foul play was not suspected. It was, in their assessment, a quiet and deliberate end, carried out alone in a place where he was unlikely to be found. That conclusion is about all the certainty this case offers. So much of Michael Kokini's life never made it into the public record. His reasons for being in Gatlinburg, the details of who he was, the full story behind that final drive, none of it was ever substantively reported. He is the most data-sparse case among all of these, a man who left almost no trace in the press, even as he became part of the park's history. What remains is the bare shape of it. A man who did not hike, drove to a dead-end pull-off, walked a short way into the woods, and was not found for nearly half a year, only yards from his own car. Corey Bruce Patrick. The last case on this list is not a disappearance, and it is not a mystery. There was never any real question about what happened or about who was responsible for it. It is here because it represents the most common and the most preventable kind of death in the Great Smoky Mountains, and because a woman lost her life for no good reason at all. In October of 2014, Corey Bruce Patrick spent part of his day drinking at the Ole Smoky, Tennessee Moonshine Distillery, a popular tourist stop in Gatlinburg. According to court documents, he also used drugs that day. By the time he got behind the wheel that night, he was badly impaired. The car he chose to drive did not even belong to him. It belonged to the only passenger riding with him that night, a woman named Heather Nicole Hendricks. What happens when an impaired man takes the wheel of someone else's car? In this case, tragedy. Patrick drove onto the stretch of parkway, known locally as the Spur, which runs through the national park between Gatlinburg and Pigeon Forge, and he drove along it at a reckless, dangerous speed. Just 1 minute before the crash, a text message sent from Hendricks's phone described what was happening, saying that Patrick was driving fast and crazy. It was a final, desperate record of her fear in the last seconds before everything came apart. The car left the road entirely and slammed head-on into a tree. Witnesses at the scene said the impact was devastating. Heather Nicole Hendricks, the owner of the car and the only passenger inside it, suffered multiple traumatic injuries and died there at the scene. She was 37 years old and a mother of 3 children. In a detail that captures the full weight of the loss, she was survived by her mother, her 3 children, and a grandson who was born just 2 weeks after her death, a child who would never meet her. How drunk was the man behind the wheel? Far too drunk to be driving. Patrick's blood alcohol level was measured at .193, more than twice the legal limit of .08 in the state of Tennessee. While rescue personnel tried to remove him from the wreckage, Patrick himself admitted that he had been drinking. He had made the choice to drink heavily, to use drugs, and then to drive at high speed on a winding park road, with another person's life in his hands. The result was entirely foreseeable and entirely avoidable. Because the crash happened inside the boundaries of the national park, the case fell to federal investigators. The National Park Service's Investigative Services Branch took the lead, and its special agents built something far stronger than a routine impaired driving charge. The evidence they assembled was serious enough that federal prosecutors did not simply charge Patrick with driving under the influence. They charged him with second-degree murder. Could a drunk driving crash really amount to murder? In the eyes of the court, it did. The argument federal prosecutors made was that Patrick's conduct went well beyond ordinary recklessness, that driving at that speed, that impaired, with that complete disregard for the life of his passenger, rose all the way to the level of murder. Faced with the full strength of the case, Patrick waived indictment and pleaded guilty in April of 2015. The sentence came down on May 6, 2016, when Chief U.S. District Judge Thomas A. Varlin sentenced Patrick to 15 years in federal prison, 180 months, for second-degree murder, followed by 5 years of supervised release. The court also ordered him to pay restitution of $15,989.77 to Hendrix's family, covering funeral and burial expenses and the value of the car he had destroyed. It was a sum that could never begin to answer for what had been taken from them. But it was the law's attempt to assign some measure of accountability. Patrick was 35 years old at the time of his sentencing, from Camden, Tennessee. He had spent his day at a tourist distillery and then made the one decision that ended a life, and effectively ended his own freedom too. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.